Hello, everybody. It's Christoph Trappe, the authentic storyteller. I'm an author, content marketing trainer. Usually I work in healthcare, but I work with brands around the globe. You're listening to the 360 Entrepreneur with Jan Ilunga.
This is episode 151, and today we talk about the power of authentic storytelling. Here we go.
Welcome to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast, the show for entrepreneurs and small business owners who dream big and want to do bigger. Join some of the world's top entrepreneurs, internet marketers, and best-selling authors as they share their inspiring stories, their struggles, and give actionable tips that will help you build, grow, and promote your online business. Here's your host, Yanni Lunga.
Hey there, how's it going? Welcome to episode 151. I'm so excited about this one. And today we talk about something that can really make a big difference in your business. It's something that can really turn things around. And we're going to be talking about authentic storytelling. If you've been with me before, you have heard me saying that I have a background in communication. So obviously, as a communication expert, I really pay attention to how entrepreneurs, content marketers, authors, people online communicate with their prospects, with their audience, with their community. And I really believe that authentic storytelling is very important. I mean, we've been telling stories for centuries. However, nowadays, we have a bit the tendency of trying to filter our stories. So we want to put only the polished version of ourselves out there. We only want to share our biggest achievements. We don't really want people to know about us when something doesn't work, right? Well, that's wrong. You shouldn't go about it that way. And you're going to hear more about why you shouldn't do that with today's guest expert, Christoph Trappe. He's an award-winning speaker, an author, marketer, an entrepreneur, and he's here with us to share his expertise and tell us why we should really embrace authentic storytelling. The show notes for today's episode are at yannilunga.com/episode 151. All right, here is the power of authentic storytelling with Christoph Trappe. Hey everybody, today we are joined by another special guest expert here with us, and I'm really excited about this one. He's a career storyteller, content marketing strategist and consultant. He's a global keynote speaker and blogger who has been named top 100 most influential content marketers by the Content Marketing Institute, as well as the IMA Internet Marketer of the Year for 2015. In addition to all this, he's also an author. His new book is called Get Real, Sharing Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. I'm so thrilled to welcome on the show Christoph Trappe. Hey Christoph, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, Christoph. So I think that the first question I have for you is to actually tell us more about yourself, because you are very busy. I mean, I say this to some of my guests, but you do so many things. So for the listeners here, can you kind of take a moment to tell us more about, what is it that you do and kind of who you are?
Yeah, you bet. So I actually grew up in the journalism world, right? And back then we didn't call it storytelling, even though that's really what it was. And I've moved the art and science of storytelling through a number of industries. I've done it in banking and nonprofits, and currently, for the most part, in healthcare. So I'm helping organizations figure out how do they, first of all, spot their uniquely original stories, and then how do they actually share them. Marketing, it still works. We're not going to throw anything under the bus, and we're not going to say, the storytelling is the new advertising or anything like that. A lot of those things are still out there. They're still working to a degree, but there's just many more options for anybody to consume content, to spend their time, all those different things. So to do that, we really are going through a little bit of a shift how organizations work. First of all, people have to be empowered to share their stories. Not all stories are positive. Some are negative. The best organizations that do this well, they do actually share negative stories. A lot of times they make them educational, right? So they don't just have a rant going out, but they say, here's what happened, here's what you can learn from it, or here's what we have learned from it if it's something that they need to explain themselves. But the whole point is, how do you talk about yourself? How do you share the things that are worth sharing? And so I basically I train organizations. I have a team that helps organization implement it. It's quite a big shift in mindset and habit. It really does become a habit once you get into it. It's very it's very natural. So, for example, in my case, it has become a habit for me. So if you go to my blog, authenticstorytelling.net, sometimes I got to move things around because I don't want to blog too much, right? It's just become a habit. And that's kind of what I'm helping organizations do. Obviously there's many, many different avenues to do it. You can go and you can do a training with an organization. You can literally help them. So I have a team of people who helps me with a big chunk of that. And then also, sometimes speaking at conferences, and then of course the book. People still read books. We're so digital. We're so digital, but yet people buy books and people read books. And actually, I had some. You can actually order it on my website. You can get it on Amazon, but you can order it. You can order a signed copy on my website. And people are still ordering, print copies. So I know that for a fact. And some people even, before I put up the link to the signed copy, they were like, well, I'd like a signed printed copy. I don't just want the Kindle, So that's kind of, those are the different avenues. And then of course, social media is another one. If you go in there, I'm fairly vocal on those different channels.
No, you sure are, because I know that we connected originally through Twitter. And Christoph, I have to ask you, because you told us about what you do about the power of storytelling, and you already gave some examples of how some stories aren't positive and how they are used. And I wanted to ask you if you could share with all of us your definition of authentic storytelling, and why do you think all the entrepreneurs and small business owners and marketers as well who are here with you and I should really think about making authentic storytelling part of their persona?
Yep, absolutely. So especially for startups, small businesses, anybody though, really. I mean, if you're an established business, it's a little bit different just because you already are established. But guess what? Things change, right? How many Vala Afshar, I think, tweeted this a few weeks ago about how many of the Fortune 500 companies from 15 years ago are still a Fortune 500 company, and it's actually a fairly small number. So everybody has just the way you tell your story can make or break your business. No pressure at all, right? but the way you tell it really can make or break it. And it's people connect with you over beliefs, over causes, over intent, those kind of things. So the way you talk about what you stand for. It's really, really, it's important. And the trick is, first of all, it has to be meant. It has to be true. So you can't make it up. And it's actually, personally, I like that about the concept, is because if it actually happened, if it's my true belief, like I don't have to remember it, right? Because I know what it is. Like I didn't make anything up. I don't have to remember what I told you or what I told my wife or my boss or whoever on the street, anywhere. It's pretty much the same thing. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't change my opinion. I change my opinion when there's new things that come up, like a social network might change or user behavior. So I change some opinions, but the concept of how are you actually real about it and how are you, sharing that story. For small especially small businesses, especially startups who sometimes have really great ideas, it's like, how do you share your story in a way that makes sense to people who know nothing about you. And the one blog post, I may have shared it with you, but the one I published about, when I talk to really, really early stage entrepreneurs, a lot of times I say, what do you do? And they say, it is so hard to explain. And I'm like, well, good job setting up that answer,
right?
Because if you tell me it's so hard to explain, how would you think that you're already setting me up to think it's not, I'm not going to get it, or I'm already tuning out.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you explain it? Some people call it an elevator pitch. Some people, I don't like the term pitch. I know entrepreneurs pitch quite often, but sometimes you're just not connecting with the right people. Sometimes, it might not be the right cause. But I think if you figure out what is your story, what is the core of why are you doing things, and what's the purpose, there's typically an audience that you can connect with. Sometimes you might not be in front of the right audience necessarily, but those are kind of the different things. It can really set yourself apart, if you share your uniquely original stories. They cannot be commoditized, because, even though other people may have similar experiences, but what you stand for, that's different from other people. It cannot be commoditized. On the other hand, competing only on price, that can totally be commoditized, right? Because you can totally win the race to the bottom, because once you get to zero, you just technically won. So that's kind of how I think about that.
Okay, I really like that. I think it's a very intriguing topic, storytelling. I'm really getting a good vibe out of you, Christoph. And you mentioned your blog post, and like in every episode, guys, you're gonna find the link to Christoph's site, authenticstorytelling.net, the blog post he mentioned, the book, and everything else we talk about in the show notes. And Christoph, when it comes to taking the steps, so there might be some entrepreneurs and small business owners here with you and I that are thinking like, okay, what you said earlier of the startup founders who tell you, well, it's difficult to explain these kind of things. That's me. So I want to make sure that I have a powerful message, that I really am authentic and I leverage storytelling to its fullest. So what do you think some of the first steps to really take in order to accomplish that?
Yeah, so the first step is you really have to make up your mind that you want to. And that sounds really simple, right? I mean, if you're not going to decide that you want to do it, you're not going to do it. And then you have to figure out who actually needs to buy in and who needs to understand what you're doing. So if you have a partner, that person needs to buy in to an extent. And, like your spouse probably, like even if you think about what I do, like there was a little bit of a learning curve for the family, right? How are you public? How do you share things? And those kind of things. So they do have to buy in to a degree. The bigger the organization gets, sometimes the bigger that group of stakeholders gets. I don't think people should overthink it. I call it, don't get stuck in approval hell, because if you have, 15 layers of things you have to go through, it's probably not going to work. So just like the real bare minimum, who do you need to, whose buy-in do you need to get, and how do you kind of start? The other thing is, once you start, you just have to go and go and go and go, and you just have to share things all the time. So, for example, it used to be when I first started, I had people ask me things. I posted a thing on office politics at one point on LinkedIn, and I actually had an executive in HR at that time ask me what prompted this blog post, which is actually a very common question, considering if for other people who only post what happens in their daily life,
right?
So, but what wasn't clear at that time, especially to that person, is that it was just one chapter of an ever evolving story of how do you share stories, how do you navigate politics, how do you navigate technology, how do you navigate time, because you only have so much time in the day, and so all those different things. So I think once you start talking, people actually stops asking those things. They're like, oh, what happened today? And it's like, nothing happened. This is a blog post I wrote, like 2 months ago, and it just published today. So that is kind of the trick to kind of establish that and kind of distance yourself a little bit from everything is a reflection of what just happened in my life 10 seconds ago. Now, everything you share does start somewhere in your life, right? But it's not necessarily like you're not live broadcasting what happened today. And you got to share a little bit more value than just ranting about something or broadcasting a gripe or something. There's really no value to griping, but the way you turn rants or negative experience into a good blog post is you actually make them educational, right? You share something. Here's something I learned. So I'll give you an example. I did move one blog into another blog. Well, the other blog, the second blog, already had a good number of people on the email list, and every time there's a new blog post, people on that list get an email that a new blog post published. Well, so I figured out how to export from the one side and import into the other, but what I forgot about is to turn off the email notifications. So when I imported it, right, like all those people were getting like 90 emails because there was 90 posts on the other blog. And some of them even replied and they were like, hey, I think you got hacked or what's going on. Not a huge number unsubscribed. There were some, of course. But so I actually blogged about it. I said, here's how you do it correctly. And traditionally, in a world where everybody wants to look the best all the time and never look human, right? I would have just swept it under the rug. But what I did is I wrote a blog post, how to correctly import a WordPress blog from one site into another, and it was like, here's what happened and here's how you need to think about it before you do it. So hopefully people will now know and people can use that information. But in the traditional model of marketing, I would have never shared that, but in the model of authentic storytelling, it's a no-brainer. It's kind of like, of course you should share it. What have you learned?
Yeah, but Christoph, I think you made a great example because if you think about especially on a platform like Twitter, that it's very dynamic, or the web more in general, like you just told us, more often than not, only the positive stories are highlighted, are showcased. I just broke my, $1 billion downloads number. I've just become a best-selling author, whatever. Those are the kind of content that we often see, but we don't often see the posts, for example, like the one you shared, where it's something along the lines of, I made a mistake, but here's what I learned from it and what you can learn from it. So if you're here with Christoph and I'm sure you are learning a thing or two about authentic storytelling and how you can actually leverage pretty much anything that happens to you and make it useful and also interesting for other people. And Christoph, in your book, you have a section where you talk about how business and personal brand can interact. So how can we combine a personal brand with a business brand in a successful way? What are some of the things we can do?
Yeah, so the trick really is to align to align people with the right businesses. So sometimes people say, well, this person is on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, and what they talk about is kind of opposite from what our business actually stands for. And people try to argue with me that that's a social media issue, and it's actually not. It's actually a human resource issue because you hired the wrong people.
Right.
And as we are moving along in this participation age, which we haven't quite arrived yet, but people will align with the right companies. So even though there still will be some jobs where, that are industrial age based, right? There's still jobs in manufacturing. There's still jobs like that don't necessarily have every little piece of this concept, but they have some pieces at the very least. But you have people who have their own personal stories, and some people call it brands, which is fine, but they have their own stories. They have what they stand for. And then that is aligned with companies, right? And then the companies stand for something that is similar. Sometimes it's really, really close. Sometimes it's a little bit different. But the thing is, the closer they align with each other, the more helpful it actually is for everybody. So, for example, if an employee has a strong brand, it can be really beneficial for the company. And if a company has a strong brand, it can be really beneficial for the employee as well.
Right.
So the trick is to figure out, what is everybody's tolerance for what level of storytelling at this point? And there's different levels. Some people are still very much stuck in the traditional marketing age, right? No negative stories. We wouldn't, let's use every superlative in the book, right? We are the best. We are state of the art. Innovate. We were so innovative. So people are still stuck in telling versus showing, and of course, storytelling is about showing and not telling. So, but the closer you can align them, and then the more you empower people, the better. At some point, clearly, I'm not saying that people should be sharing confidential information,
Right.
information protected by privacy laws. That is not what I'm saying at all. But there's always things you can share, and especially, like in healthcare, I was I blogged about this the other day. In the U.S., we have the HIPAA law, right? It's a privacy law. And some organizations claim they can't share stories because of HIPAA, and that is totally not correct, actually, because HIPAA doesn't prevent you from sharing stories. What it prevents you from sharing is information that's private to somebody without their consent.
Right.
So bottom line is, I own my stories. I can share them all I want. I mean, nobody else, but the thing is, once somebody else is part of my story, I should get their buy-in, aka consent, anyways, whether or not they're a patient or not, doesn't make any difference. I should, if I'm going to blog about, you and me talking, I should at the very least send you a preview link, and say, here's what's publishing, and it has your name in it. Do you know what I mean? Or if I don't mention you and just use it as a general example, and nobody actually knows who I'm talking about, I could probably just share something without consent. But those are kind of the rules of engagement, I think. But so it's important. Brands can really make it work for them if they do it well and authentically.
Yeah, and I think that you made it clear, and to some degree, it's kind of obvious, at least to some extent, that what can be shared or should be shared and what maybe shouldn't. So when it comes to making somebody else part of the story, you just told us, you made the example of the healthcare system, which I think it's one of the most kind of sensitive industries, or that are more paying attention to these issues. So I think it's good for you guys who are here with Christoph and I to keep that in mind when you want to mention somebody as part of your story and you want to get down to specifics. And the title of your book, Christoph, is Get Real, Sharing Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. And I wanted to ask you if you have another tip or two on some of the things we should think about and do in order to share authentic stories so that we get long-term success.
Yeah, the biggest trick really is to identify those stories. And then the other thing is, they actually have to be lived first. So, if your authentic story is really a very negative one, you're not going to get people to share positive stories, right? Because they didn't happen. So the trick really is, like if let's say you somebody is, starting the HR department at a new company, and they're like, oh, nobody has any good stories to share. And then I say, well, how come they don't? Well, they're like, well, because it kind of sucks here, And well, that is not a storytelling problem. That's a culture problem. So you first have to change the culture, and then the culture can be reflected. And the way I talk about that sometimes is when you have, when you have internal and external versions of the same story, that's usually a sign that the culture is not where it could be or should be. So first you have to work on the culture, then you can share those stories. And you know what? People are very willing to share stories that are true anyways. And that doesn't mean just repeating the marketing team's stories, but it means, something good happens. People just share the good stories. I mean, here, for example, at MedTouch, where I spent most of my days, is people will just openly share their stories on social media. They're like, here's what we did. It's so awesome, blah, 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 blah. And they do it and nobody even asked them to.
Right.
And, but they do it because they want to. So first of all, you have to work on that. And then you have to empower people. I've seen organizations where people shared stories and then they got feedback from like the C-level and they were like, oh, well, I wouldn't have said that. And you know what happens? You know what happens when a founder or an owner says that to an employee that they just hired, that person will never ever share a story ever again.
Right.
So you want to be very careful with what you pick on and what you don't. In general, I think I wouldn't recommend any feedback other than positive. If it's a real problem, I would bring it up. But in general, there's a lot of things people should be able to say, and it shouldn't be a problem. And here's the other thing. Obviously, people lose their jobs over saying certain things.
Right.
But and we've seen those headlines. And I think a lot of those cases are actually kind of overdoing it. I think very few of those cases are actually true fireable offenses, in my opinion. But why is it not okay? It's okay to share. We should applaud people for sharing stories, and encourage it. And that's kind of how you build that culture of trust and culture of engagement and culture of storytelling.
Yeah, that I think, I love that you talked about that, because there may be some people here who maybe business owners themselves, or they may be collaborating with somebody and they may have thought, well, okay, what if I share my story and then I get a feedback? Okay, does that mean that that should be the first and last time I do that? Does it mean that I should edit my storytelling? What should I do? So Christoph, thank you for mentioning that. And we have covered quite a lot of ground. You told us more about what is it that you do? You defined authentic storytelling with us, for us, and you told us why we should be using it. You shared some advice on defining kind of our storytelling and how a business and a personal brand can interact. And now you told us some things we can do so that we share authentic stories for long-term success. And you mentioned your site, authenticstorytelling.net. You're also on Twitter at @ctrappe, and that's spelled Trappe. So like in every episode, you're going to find the links to everything Christoph and I have talked about in the show notes. And the final question I have for you, Christoph, is if somebody would like to connect with you or ask you a question or give you some feedback or simply thank you for this awesome conversation, what is the best way to do that? Is it through Twitter or your site?
Yeah, either way works. Twitter, if you send a message on there, sometimes I get lost in the shuffle just because there's so much going on there. But in general, I think absolutely Twitter works. You can go on my site and send a message through there. So all those things.
Perfect. Christoph, thank you so very much for being here with us, telling us more about your book, Get Real, Sharing Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success, and for teaching us a couple of lessons on authentic storytelling. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we are back. Christoph, thank you so much for being here with us and for shedding light on the power of authentic storytelling. I'm so grateful. And you heard it. I mean, Christoph said that it is important to really share all kind of stories with our prospects, with our community, so that we can build a human connection with them. And keep in mind that storytelling is something that you can use for your business at 360 degrees, meaning on your podcast, if you have a podcast, in your blog post, and on social media platforms as well. And if you think about social media, it's kind of going toward that direction more and more. I mean, if we think about, first, it has been live video streaming platforms like Periscope and Meerkat, and now we have something like Snapchat and Snapchat Stories, so we can really kind of journal our day or give people a behind the scenes look at what we are working on, or at us recording a podcast episode in the studio and this kind of thing. So make sure, again, to start embrace the power of authentic storytelling. And speaking of Snapchat, I've recently started using the platform. So if you're there, let's connect. I want to learn more about you, about your story, and about what you're doing these days. On Snapchat, you find me. My username is @the_Yanilunga, so the same I use for Twitter. So make sure to connect with me, and I'm looking forward to snapping back at you. This is it for today. Again, make sure to check out the show notes over at yanilunga.com/episode 151. Thank you so much for joining Christoph Trappe and I'll be back with you next week with another incredible episode of the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast. For more tips and tools, head over to www.yanilunga.com.